Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk about a decision, one that every person must face at some point in their life. It's the choice between God's way and the way of the world. One leads to purpose, peace, and eternal reward. The other leads to temporary pleasure, distraction, and ultimately, emptiness. Every day we are presented with two paths: the broad road that the world offers, filled with distractions, materialism, and fleeting success, or the narrow road of righteousness, faith, and true fulfillment. The question is, which path will you choose? The world operates on a system of promises that are enticing, attractive, and often seem too good to resist. From the time we are young, we are conditioned to believe that success is measured by material wealth, social status, and the approval of others. We are told that if we work hard enough, achieve enough, and accumulate enough, we will finally find happiness and fulfillment. Society constantly feeds us messages that reinforce this idea. Advertisements tell us that buying the newest products will make us feel better about ourselves. Social media paints a picture of success as luxury vacations, designer clothes, and expensive cars. The world tells us that power and influence will bring us security, that fame will give us significance, and that financial success will solve all of our problems. But let's stop and ask the real question: how many people have actually found lasting fulfillment through these things? How many celebrities, business tycoons, or social influencers have reached the pinnacle of worldly success only to realize that they still feel empty inside? The truth is, no amount of money, no level of fame, and no degree of influence can fill the deep longing within the human soul. The reason is simple. We were not created to be satisfied by the things of this world. Material possessions, social recognition, and even great achievements may bring temporary excitement, but they can never provide the deep, lasting joy that every person truly desires. That joy can only come from one source: a relationship with God. Consider the countless stories of people who have seemingly made it in the world's eyes, but still struggle with depression, anxiety, and a sense of emptiness. They have spent years chasing after wealth, power, or recognition, only to realize that it does not bring the satisfaction they were promised. Many people who have everything still feel like something is missing. They keep striving, keep chasing, and keep hoping that the next achievement or possession will finally bring them peace, but it never does. The reason is that the world's way is deceptive. It tells you that happiness is always just one more step away, one more promotion, one more accomplishment, one more purchase. It creates an endless cycle where people keep running but never reach the destination they long for. God's way, however, is completely different. His word teaches us that true joy is not something we can find externally. It is something that comes from within, from being connected to Him. Unlike the world's empty promises, God's promises are real, powerful, and unshakable. He doesn't offer temporary pleasure. He offers lasting fulfillment. When we align our lives with God's purpose, we begin to experience a deeper sense of peace and contentment. Instead of constantly striving for more, we learn to rest in His provision. Instead of looking to the world for validation, we find our worth in Him. Instead of chasing after temporary highs, we build our lives on something eternal. A powerful example of this is the life of King Solomon. He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful kings in history. He had everything a person could ever dream of: gold, palaces, wisdom, influence, and thousands of servants at his command. He pursued pleasure, indulged in every luxury, and withheld nothing from himself. Yet, after experiencing all the world had to offer, he came to a sobering conclusion. In Ecclesiastes, he writes, "I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind." Imagine that. Someone who had everything the world could give still felt unfulfilled. He realized that apart from God, everything was empty. In the end, he declared that the only thing that truly mattered was fearing God and keeping his commandments. That is the reality we must understand today. The world will continue to make promises, but it will never deliver on them. But God, in his love and wisdom, has already given us everything we need for a life of joy, peace, and purpose. When we choose to follow him, we step into a life that is not based on fleeting pleasures, but on eternal fulfillment. So ask yourself today, are you chasing the world's promises, or are you embracing the truth of God's? One leads to endless striving and emptiness. The other leads to a life of peace, contentment, and true joy. The choice is yours. The world often confuses happiness with peace, but they are not the same. Happiness is an emotion. It comes and goes depending on circumstances. It can be triggered by external things like success, money, relationships, or achievements, but it never lasts. One moment you have it, the next moment it's gone. That's because happiness is based on temporary situations. And as soon as those situations change, so does your sense of joy. Peace, on the other hand, is something entirely different. Peace is not dependent on circumstances. It's not something you feel only when everything is going right. Peace is a deep, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing that your life is in God's hands. It's the assurance that no matter what happens around you, you are safe, secure, and exactly where you're meant to be. That kind of peace can only come from walking in God's way. When you choose to follow God, you are choosing a path that is built on a solid foundation. You don't have to wake up every morning anxious about what other people think of you. You don't have to live in fear of losing your wealth, your reputation, or your status. When you walk in God's way, you don't have to chase after people's approval or live in constant worry about what might happen tomorrow. The Bible gives us a clear promise. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. This means that when you put God first, he takes care of everything else. You don't have to stress about money, opportunities, or the future. God has already arranged everything for you. Your job is to walk in obedience, trust him, and let him direct your steps. Many people spend their entire lives chasing success, thinking that once they reach a certain level, they will finally feel fulfilled. But true success is not just about material wealth or achievements. It's about living out the purpose that God has placed on your life. Success is inevitable when you align yourself with his will because he equips, strengthens, and provides for those who follow him. Think about it this way. Imagine two builders. One builds his house on sand, the other on solid rock. The one who builds on sand finishes quickly. His house looks beautiful, and from the outside, it seems like he has everything together. But the moment a storm comes, his house collapses because it has no strong foundation. The second builder, however, takes his time. He digs deep and lays a strong foundation on the rock. His house might take longer to build, and from the outside, it might not look as impressive at first, but when the storm comes, his house stands firm. That's what life is like when you follow God's way. A real-life example of this can be seen in the story of a wealthy businessman who spent his entire life chasing money and success. He worked tirelessly, built an empire, and reached the highest levels of financial achievement. Yet deep inside, he felt empty. He had the cars, the houses, and the respect of the world, but he couldn't sleep at night. Anxiety and stress consumed him because he was always afraid of losing everything he had worked for. One day, he met a man who lived a much simpler life. This man didn't have great wealth, but he had something far more valuable: peace. He wasn't worried about the future. He wasn't chasing after people's approval. He had a joy and confidence that the businessman had never experienced. When asked what his secret was, the man simply said, "I put my trust in God. I don't worry about tomorrow because I know he has already taken care of it." That statement changed the businessman's life. He realized that all his success meant nothing without peace. He decided to stop living for the world and started seeking God's purpose instead. Over time, his life changed. He still worked hard, But now he had peace because he knew his success was in God's hands. He no longer lived in fear of losing what he had because he understood that true security comes from God, not from money or achievements. This is what happens when you choose God's way. You don't just gain temporary happiness, you gain lasting peace. You don't have to worry about losing what you have because your foundation is built on something unshakable. And when you align yourself with God's purpose, success is not just possible, it's inevitable. Not just in the material sense, but in a much deeper, more meaningful way. The world will always try to convince you that peace comes from having more, achieving more, and being more. But true peace only comes from knowing that your life is in the hands of the one who controls everything. So the question is, will you continue chasing after temporary happiness, or will you choose the path of lasting peace by trusting in God? The answer to that question will determine the course of your life. The world is full of confusion. Everywhere you look, people are searching for meaning, for identity, for something to define them. They turn to social media, trends, and society's ever-changing standards, hoping to find a sense of belonging. One day the world tells them they should act one way, and the next day it tells them something completely different. The result? A generation lost in uncertainty, constantly questioning who they are and what their purpose is. The world offers countless ways to define yourself. Some people try to find their identity in their career. They believe that if they climb the corporate ladder high enough, they will finally feel like they matter. Others seek validation through relationships, believing that if they find the right person, they will feel complete. Some chase after popularity, thinking that if enough people like them, they will feel valued. But no matter how much they achieve, how many followers they gain, or how much approval they receive, the emptiness remains. That's because the world's way leads to confusion. It never gives clear answers, only more questions. The world tells people to be whoever they want to be, but then criticizes them for not fitting into the latest definition of success. It encourages them to chase after happiness, but then constantly moves the target, leaving them frustrated and lost. This is why so many people today struggle with anxiety, depression, and a deep sense of unworthiness. They have built their identity on something that keeps shifting, and when it fails them, they don't know who they are anymore. But God's way is different. His truth does not change. The same truth that guided people thousands of years ago still applies today. When you follow God, you don't have to guess who you are. You already know. You are a child of God, created with purpose, loved beyond measure, and placed on this earth for a reason. You don't have to search for your worth in temporary things because your worth is already established in Him. There is a deep peace that comes when you know who you are in God. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself to others. You no longer have to chase after trends or worry about what the world thinks of you. Instead of being constantly pulled in different directions, you stand firm on a foundation that does not shake. A powerful example of this can be seen in the story of a young woman who spent years searching for her identity. She tried everything, changing her appearance, seeking validation through social media, and chasing after success in her career. She believed that if she could just fit into society's expectations, she would finally feel happy. But no matter what she did, the emptiness inside her only grew stronger. One day she reached a breaking point. She realized that she had spent her entire life trying to be someone she was not, and she was exhausted. That's when she turned to God. Instead of looking to the world for answers, she opened His Word. Instead of chasing after approval, she started seeking His presence. And for the first time in her life, she felt a peace she had never known. She no longer needed to define herself by the world's standards because she understood that her identity was in Christ. She was no longer confused about who she was because God had already called her, chosen, loved, and valuable. Her life changed, not because her circumstances changed, but because she finally knew the truth about who she was. This is the power of God's way. While the world leaves people lost and uncertain, God brings clarity. He does not base your worth on how much money you make, how popular you are, or how successful you become. He sees beyond all of that and calls you his own. The world will continue to change. Trends will come and go. People's opinions will shift, but God's truth remains the same. If you build your life on him, you will never be lost. You won't have to search for meaning because you will already know your purpose. You won't have to chase after identity because your identity will be firmly rooted in him. So the choice is yours. Will you continue to follow the world's ever-changing path filled with confusion and uncertainty, or will you choose God's way where clarity, peace, and purpose await you? The answer to that question will define the course of your life. Walking with God requires courage because it means standing against the pressures of the world. The world will always try to make you compromise, whether it's your values, your faith, or your integrity. It will tempt you to take shortcuts, to follow the crowd, to do what is easy instead of what is right. But the path of true greatness is never found in following the majority. It is found in standing firm in what is right, even when it is difficult. Look at the examples of Daniel, Joseph, and Jesus. These were not ordinary men. They were men of courage, men who refused to bend under pressure. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den because he refused to stop praying to God. Joseph was imprisoned because he refused to betray his integrity. Jesus endured the cross because he knew that God's plan was greater than the pain he faced. In each case, they could have chosen the easy way out. They could have given in to fear, but they didn't. And because of their faithfulness, God honored them. This same principle applies today. If you choose to walk with God, there will be moments when you feel alone. There will be times when the world mocks you, when friends leave you, when people don't understand why you won't just go with the flow. But if you stay committed, you will see his blessings and favor in ways you never imagined. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to follow God's way is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of losing opportunities, but fear is a lie. The enemy wants you to believe that if you stand firm in your faith, you will miss out on something. The truth is, when you walk with God, you don't miss out, you step into something greater. The rewards of obedience far outweigh any temporary pleasures the world can offer. A powerful example of this is seen in the story of a young businessman who was offered a deal that could have made him millions, but there was one problem. He was asked to compromise his values. Everyone around him told him to take the deal. This is how business works, they said. Everyone does it. But deep down, he knew that if he agreed, he would be sacrificing his integrity. It wasn't easy. He faced pressure from his colleagues, from investors, even from his own thoughts, telling him that he was being foolish. But he chose to trust God instead. He walked away from the deal, knowing that his faith was worth more than money. At first, it seemed like he had lost a golden opportunity, but months later, another door opened, one that was even bigger, and this time, it required no compromise. God honored his faithfulness, and he realized that standing firm was the best decision he had ever made. This is what happens when you walk with courage. You may have to endure some difficult moments. You may have to make hard choices. But in the end, God always rewards those who remain faithful. If you are facing a situation where you feel pressure to compromise, remember this. The world's approval is temporary, but God's favor lasts forever. Don't be afraid to stand alone. Don't be afraid to choose what is right, even when it costs you something. Because when you walk with God, you are never really alone. He is with you, guiding you, strengthening you, and preparing something greater for you. Walking with God requires courage, but it is always worth it. And when you stand firm, you will see his blessings in your life in ways that go beyond anything you could have imagined. Choosing God's way over the world may come with challenges. You may face rejection, be misunderstood, or even lose relationships. There will be moments when the world makes you feel like you are missing out, like you are sacrificing too much. But here's the truth. Whatever you give up for God, he replaces with something far greater. The reward always outweighs the sacrifice. Psalm 84:11 says, "No good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly." This means that when you choose to follow God, you are not losing, you are positioning yourself for something better. The world may offer temporary pleasure, but God offers lasting fulfillment. The world may promise success, but God gives true prosperity, the kind that cannot be taken away. Throughout history, those who have walked in obedience to God have seen this truth played out. Abraham was asked to leave everything familiar and step into the unknown. To the world, it might have seemed like he was giving up security, comfort, and stability. But what did God do? He made Abraham the father of many nations. The sacrifice was great, but the reward was even greater. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison for something he didn't do. He could have questioned whether following God was worth it. He could have chosen bitterness, but he remained faithful. And what happened? God elevated him to the second highest position in Egypt. One day he was in prison, the next day he was ruling a nation. The years of suffering could have made him feel like his sacrifice was in vain, but in the end, God's plan was bigger than he could have ever imagined. This principle is still true today. God never asks you to give up something unless he has something better for you. If he removes people from your life, it's because he has relationships that will strengthen you instead of drain you. If he asks you to walk away from an opportunity, it's because he has something more fulfilling ahead. If he calls you to stand alone, it's because he is setting you apart for something greater. A great example of this is a young woman who had worked for years to build her career. She had finally reached a place where she was being noticed, where promotions were within reach, but then she was asked to compromise. It wasn't anything extreme, just a small lie here, a little bending of the truth there. Everyone else was doing it, and she knew that if she refused, she might lose everything she had worked for. She had a choice to make. She could follow the world's way, blend in and secure her position, or she could stand firm in her faith and trust that God would take care of her. It wasn't easy, but she chose to walk in integrity. And just as she feared, the opportunity slipped through her hands. She was passed over for promotions, and for a moment it felt like she had made the wrong decision, but God was not finished. A few months later, she was offered a job at a different company, one that not only paid more, but also aligned with her values. The very thing she thought she had lost forever was restored to her in a greater way. Looking back, she realized that if she had chosen to compromise, she would have secured temporary success, but lost something much more valuable, her peace, her integrity, and God's greater plan for her life. This is what happens when you trust God. The world will make you feel like you are missing out, but God is preparing something greater. The enemy wants to convince you that obedience to God will cost you too much, but the truth is, the cost of disobedience is far greater. The world's rewards are temporary. The money, fame, and success it offers will all fade, but God's blessings are eternal. When you choose his way, he not only blesses you in this life, but he also stores up rewards for you in eternity. Every act of faith, every sacrifice, every moment you choose to trust him does not go unnoticed. So when the journey gets hard, when you feel like giving up, when you wonder if it's worth it, remember this: the reward is always greater than the sacrifice. God sees every tear, every struggle, every step of obedience, and he is faithful to honor those who honor him. Trust his timing, trust his plan, and watch as he turns your sacrifice into something beyond anything you could have imagined. Today I challenge you to make a choice. Will you follow the way of the world, chasing things that will fade away, or will you choose God's way, the path of peace, purpose, and eternal reward? It's not always easy, but it is always worth it. The world offers temporary pleasure, but God offers eternal joy. The world leaves you empty, but God fills you with purpose. The world may promise success, but true success is found in him Choose wisely, choose courageously, choose God's way.